Hello, I am Dr. Terry Orzie, American Terrorism subject matter expert, and I'm here today to continue my series of talking about American citizens charged with acts related to terrorism and giving you a bit of open source intelligence on the event as well as the terrorist himself or herself. Before I get started, let me ask you to please subscribe to my channel so that you continue to get videos. I try to keep them short, keep your interest, but subscribe so you can watch these videos at your leisure or as soon as they come out. Thank you. Now, let's get back onto the real reason we're here, and that's to talk about Edward Archer. Edward Archer was arrested January 7, 2016. In a sudden attack, unprovoked, he ran up to a police car. Philadelphia police officer Jesse Hartnett was driving this police patrol car, and he inserted his gun into the window as he ran up to the car and as well as inside the car and shot Officer Hartnett several times. Despite being shot, and it was in his left arm, Hartnett was able to exit the car and shoot the suspect. Later in the hospital, the suspect, his name is Edward Archer, claimed he had pledged allegiance to ISIS. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, investigated this shooting and said it was indeed a terrorist attack. By the time we're done, you'll have to let me know if you think it was a terrorist attack or could this guy have had mental issues that provoked this. The case is actually widely cited in scholarly work on lone wolf terrorism. It's an example of an individual who carries out an act of terrorism without having any actual contact with terrorist group, leadership, or individuals. He was convicted ultimately of attempted murder of Officer Hartnett in January of 2018, and he was sentenced with more than 50 years behind bars. Edward Archer was 30 years old, unemployed, and living with his mother in Needham, Pennsylvania at the time of the shooting. The weapon Archer was using in this attack was a 9mm Glock 17 handgun capable of carrying 13 rounds. This weapon was reported stolen from a home of a police officer in October of 2013. Archer did confess that he committed the attack in the name of Islam and that Allah ordered him to commit the attack, and that he targeted a police officer because they defended laws that went against the teachings of the Quran. According to the Imam, Archer made the Hajj to Mecca and studied for 6 months in Egypt. What is the Hajj to Mecca? Hajj in Islam is the pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, which every adult Muslim must make at least once in his or her lifetime. The Hajj is the fifth of the fundamental Muslim practices and institutions known as the 5 pillars of Islam. He was described by local Muslims as devout, interested in religion, and closely involved with the establishment of community activities. According to an FBI official, Archer spent time in Saudi between October and November 2011 for Hajj, and then he traveled to Egypt for 8 months in 2012 to study Arabic. According to acquaintances, Archer was the target of racist comments during his time in Egypt, to a point where he ended up returning to the United States prematurely. The shooting, the FBI wondered how a man such as Archer, unemployed, living with his mother, with no foreign travels, could afford to get a passport and pay for this extended stay in the Middle East. Suspicions of these trips of being funded by people or organizations linked to terrorism were raised, and it was later found out that the trip was funded by a group of local Muslim men who would give donations to finance such trips for newcomers. Now, this wasn't Edward's first arrest. He was actually arrested back in January of 2012 when he and 2 other men confronted the husband of Archer's ex-wife, and he was sentenced to prison. But the sentence was reduced to time served, and he was released and placed on probation. In November of 2015, he was found guilty of several charges that included fraud and forgery, and when he was out on probation and awaiting sentencing for that case at the time of the shooting. According to Archer's mother, he suffered from head injuries while playing football in a moped accident. She also added that he had some form of mental illness, specifically saying that he would hear voices in his head. In addition, she felt he was targeted by the police. A former classmate recalled that Archer was a loner in high school who had a passion for football and was not at all religious. 2 associates stated that he had become more drastic and combatant following his trips to the Middle East, though another said his trips seemed to have a calming effect on him. Then this raises the question I brought up earlier. Is this an example of lone wolf terrorism inspired by Islamic propaganda, or was it a crime committed by an individual suffering from some form of mental illness? Now let's talk a little bit about Officer Jesse James Hartnett. He was 33 years old. At the time, he was a 4-year veteran of the Philadelphia Police Department. He graduated from Monsignor Bonner High School in 2001, and he previously served with the United States Coast Guard, joining right after the September 11th attacks occurred, and serving on active duty throughout August of 2008. He then served with the Coast Guard Reserve from 2009 to 2015. In September 2010, he became an officer with the East Lansdowne Police Force and worked there until July 2011, which he was then transferred to the Philadelphia Police Department. Hartnett was struck by 3 bullets, suffering a broken arm and nerve damage, but he was wearing a bulletproof vest at the time of the shooting, and that probably contributed to saving his life. On April 11, 2016, Hartnett was honored by the Philadelphia Phillies by being invited to throw the opening pitch, and he was also permitted to propose marriage to his girlfriend on the ball field. Archer was taken into custody following the shooting, and 3 days after the shooting, some unknown female stopped a police officer on the street and said he was actually part of this group of 4, this cell if you will, and that Archer was not the most radical, and that the threat was not over. The threat to police was not over. On January 13, 6 days after the shooting, FBI Director James Comey announced that the FBI was investigating the shooting as a terrorist attack. The next day, Comey announced that the FBI at the time had not found any evidence that Archer was involved with any terrorist cells, or that had been any planned attacks in Philadelphia. And he also downplayed the significance of that tip. So you may be asking yourself, how does Edward Archer fit the violent extremist terrorism profile? So let's go through the 8 markers. Male, as we know, 93% of the American terrorists are male. He was 30 years old, and 34% of them range between the ages of 25 and 34. He had some college. He was divorced. Only 4% of the American terrorists were divorced. He was from a working class family. He was also working class. He was a construction worker, works in private security and utility subcontracting. 38% of them are from the working class. He did not have a father figure in his life. He was living with his mother. He was not displaced, but he was definitely felt victimized and angry. Based off of this, I would say he fit 6 of the markers. Divorce, some less likely, and he was not displaced. So thank you for listening, and join me again when I talk about the next American terrorist.